Thank you, Beatrice, and thank you, Mary, for this exchange of insights on the impact of automation on the global economy. I think it's a perspective that truly sets the context for the following topics today. Next, we have Neil Ward-Dutton from IDC. With a career spanning over 20 years, Neil is recognized as one of Europe's most experienced and high-profile technology industry analysts. Author of 10 books on IT and business strategy, we are honored to have him representing IDC in sharing with us insights from the automation market.
Hello.
Neil?
Hi, everybody.
The screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here and presenting to you today. And I'm going to talk to you today about the trends we're seeing here at IDC in terms of practical implementation of intelligent automation. So what is it that people are trying to do? How do we really go beyond simple views of where we really started a few years ago in this topic, specifically the pure RPA view? What's happening beyond that? Where are people going next? And what is really, what are we learning about how organizations can really scale and transform? So how can we go from tactical implementation of intelligent automation to a true strategic approach? What's involved? And I'll explain this all to you in the next 25 or so minutes. All right, so let's get started. And I want to start with a very high level starting point because I want to set the scene properly. We heard in the last session about the broader kind of digital transformation landscape, the transformation of industries and so on. And that's really where I want to start and then move on from there. So we see fundamentally that organizations across Europe and indeed across the world, everybody is still on this digital transformation journey. And some organizations might like to say that this is it's boring, it's old, it's not interesting anymore. But when we speak to clients, they are still living this every day. It's a huge deal for them all the time. And what we're finding is that while most organizations start out looking at the edge of their organization, the outside edge, if you like, when they're transforming, they start out by looking at how can we create digital products and services and experiences that are, have insights at their core, they're personalized. We're able to create integrated experiences that work across different venues and channels and so on. That's where organizations start, but we find very quickly that organizations need to go further. And this is fundamentally because the digitization of the edge is fundamentally all about integration. It's about integration of information silos, organizational silos, product lines, channels, data insights, all of this stuff coming together. But most large organizations in particular have actually spent the last 15 years going in completely the opposite direction. They haven't been integrating their operations. Actually, they've been dispersing them across the globe often, essentially putting the work where it's the cheapest or where you can get the most scale. So we see shared services centers, offshore partnerships, complicated supply networks, and so on. And what we find, of course, is that any organization that's really serious about digital transformation has to find a way to bring these two together, because you might start out only digitizing the edge, the outside of your organization, but every organization very quickly realizes that if you just create a fancy website or some mobile apps, or you do some great stuff with IoT, but you can't handle problems effectively, you can't handle customer complaints effectively, you can't respond to customer inquiries quickly, you can't send out accurate bills, you can't really handle compliance effectively, well, you haven't really delivered on the end-to-end customer experience promise. In fact, you may have really done worse than if you'd done nothing at all, because you're making really fancy promises with your mobile apps and so on, but you're not really keeping those promises in terms of the end-to-end customer journey. And we find that the customer journey in reality, it looks a little bit like this. It's not just about the edge of your organization. Actually, as a customer goes through their day-to-day experience of working with your brand, they're moving from backwards, from the front to the back, to the front, to the back, to the front, all the way through your operations all the time. They don't know it, of course, or they shouldn't know it. But often this is where things break down, because organizations tend to just focus on the outside and not so much on the inside. And so it's a natural consequence that organizations really quickly need to think about digitizing their operations. And this is the starting point really for the strategic view of intelligent automation. And it's certainly true that organizations still need a lot of help with this. As we know from our research at IDC, organizations are really struggling with process digitization, with digital operations. We're finding that when we look at how organizations are achieving returns on their investments here, only 26% say that they're delivering an ROI on the process digitization. Only 18% are delivering increased speed to market. And only 19% are really improving the kind of trustability of their operations. So there's big gaps. You can see that as big problems, but also, of course, you can see it as big opportunities. There's so much more to do. And this is, again, the strategic context for intelligent automation. Now, let's just look at this briefly from a slightly different perspective. And I know this might seem a bit academic, but it is important to understand, because we find that many organizations really hit a wall when they're trying to digitize operations and really connect a digital inside to a digital outside. Why is that? It's fundamentally because actually these things are built on different sets of assumptions, even different cultural viewpoints of what it means to perform. So on the outside, the digital outside, that's the orange piece here that you can see. And when people create digital products, services, experiences, it's all about in the moment experience. It's all about dynamic networks. It's all about listening to signals from the market, building propositions around customer need, and bringing your ecosystem together to deliver the right proposition for your customer. It's about outcomes. It's about being able to change quickly. It's really about sensing and responding. Yeah. So it's all about pulling resources together to serve the needs of the customer on that channel, at that time, in the right context. When we look at operations and the digitalization of operations, actually they're really still mostly built on in more kind of classic industrial kind of models and assumptions about how the world works and what performance looks like. They're very often built around static organizational structures and relationships, not dynamic ecosystems. It's all about linear flow of product, of resource, of material, of value. It's not about dynamic ecosystems. Often we're still talking about, long-term planning cycles and forecasting, not listening to the market and tuning on a dynamic basis. Rather than starting with the customer, often we're really starting with a product and figuring out, okay, here's what we want to produce. Where do we get the material and the resource from? And then how do we push it out to market? So fundamentally different assumptions about how the world works and what performance really looks like. And the problem comes is when you want to really do true transformation, you have to connect both of these together. So how do you make the leap before it's too late, right? How do you connect the inside to the outside before you run out of time and before your competitors really beat you to the results you need? Well, there's two ways organizations can do this. They can try to transform any kind of legacy systems, organizational structures, processes, and bring them into the digital world. Re-architect the systems around, as a service delivery models with web access from anywhere, more dynamic workforce operating models and so on. We can try and do that, but we all know, you all know, I know, it's expensive. It costs a lot of money, and there's a lot of risk involved. That would be a huge change, and not many organizations can do that. So we find many organizations want to do this incrementally. They want to essentially wrap the legacy and bring it into the new world. They want to build bridges back from the new into the old. And again, this is the more of the strategic context for intelligent automation. It's about bridging the old and the new, the fast and the slow, and the outside and the inside. Now, it's important also to realize, as we just finished looking at the context here, that it's super easy to get carried away about automation and think that everything is going to be automated everywhere. And of course, this really isn't true. Some work can be automated, but still humans are super, super important, and they will continue to be important for a very, very, very long time. And one of the reasons is that, again, coming back to the whole customer journey, customer experience view of this, when you think about the key moments of truth that really make a difference for customers as they experience a brand, many of those moments of truth are kind of realized through interactions with people. Maybe not all of them, but many of them are, because many of them actually come about because something has gone wrong and there's an opportunity to make it right. And in those situations, often that is about people. And so automation can't only be about taking people out and replacing them with bots or replacing them with automated workflows or rules or whatever it is. What we actually need is a whole spectrum of choices about how we can go from full automation of work on one end of a spectrum down to providing better information, predictions, recommendations to human experts, more of an augmentation view. So we have a spectrum which needs to be in place here. And this gives us the setup for what we think is beyond simple RPA and gives us that true view of future intelligent automation. It's about a toolkit of technologies that you can apply so that you can use the right collection of tools for the right use case. Sometimes it will be able to completely automate a full activity end to end using one technology. But in many cases, it won't be. You'll have to use a variety of technologies, and you won't be able to fully automate. For some of the parts of the use case, it will make more sense to augment the human with smart recommendations, with smart predictions, with next best action types of intervention and so on. So it really sets up the need to have this, what we call a modern business automation toolkit. Now, I'll talk more about that in a minute. But before I do that, I want to just quickly talk a bit about the opportunity. So at IDC, we talk about this broad space as being, we talk about intelligent process automation. And I'll talk more about what's in that category in a minute. But let's dig into the opportunity and see what's really there. The first thing I'm going to share with you is some insight from a recent survey we did of over 400 organizations across Europe. And we were asking them, in which business functions do you plan to invest in business automation through 2020, the remainder of 2020, and 2021? And you can see from this chart where organizations told us they were planning to invest. So this is the numbers you can see here are the proportions of businesses we spoke to who said that this business function is a target for investment in business automation in the next year or 18 months. And what's interesting about this, on one hand, you could say, well, there's maybe no surprises here. We know that automation is always really important in IT. And as environments get more complex and people have to work from home, we need to drive more automation in IT, operations management and service delivery and so on. And you would also say, well, yeah, it's obvious that customer service, support, marketing, those customer-facing pieces are going to have more automation. But what's interesting to me is it's not just about IT and the edge of the organization, right? The customer-facing pieces. It flows right the way back into the core back office functions. And even in the business function we saw with the least appetite for near-term investment in business automation, in legal departments, that's still 50% of organizations. So I think what we can take away from this is that in pretty much every major business function, there is a strong appetite and desire to invest in more business automation. And I think that's pretty compelling. But what does that mean in terms of the market? Where is the actual opportunity in terms of revenue? Well, as part of our research programs here, we do forecast the market. And although you may not necessarily be interested in exactly in the market view, I think it's still instructive. So just to show you quickly, we look at this from the perspective of different styles of automation. I'm not going to spend a long time explaining what all the different styles are, but I wanted to call out a couple of the pieces of the market we look at. The first one I'm calling out is what we call system-centric automation. And that is really automation that is very, it's more traditionally kind of IT focused, and it's about APIs, it's about kind of almost real-time transfer of data between systems that doesn't involve people. It's about synchronizing data between systems at the back end, all that kind of stuff. And that's quite a mature market. And you can see the dark blue line here. We've still got pretty strong growth, but where even stronger growth is coming is in what we call labor-centric automation, which is around robotic process automation, RPA, intelligent document processing. So that's essentially AI capabilities around document categorization, classification, entity extraction, translation, those kinds of things. And what we call process-centric application platforms. That's often also referred to as workflow platforms, or even BPM, or some people will call it DPA, digital process automation platforms. That category is growing even faster. And we're seeing that principally because organizations really see the value in being able to engage teams, even individuals, in driving improvements in their own work. And I'll come back to that in 1 second. The third piece you can see down at the bottom is another segment we look at, which is around planning. So these are tools that organizations use to basically figure out where are they going to automate next, and what should be the priorities, where are the biggest opportunities, and so on. So these are major markets growing fast, and there are very good reasons for that. Now, I want to come back to this idea I shared with you a minute ago around a business automation toolkit. Because at IDC, we realized that, this is not just about RPA. And you can see here from this view, people are investing in much more than just RPA. And we look at this, really quite holistically. Fundamentally, we work backwards from the problem statement. And the problem statement is, how do I, as a senior representative from an enterprise, how do I drive automation in the work that happens in my organization? And actually, when you look at it from the customer problem point of view, there are many ways to do that. And we try to include all of those things in our view of the market, our framework, if you like. Now, you can see the green box here, that's RPA, and many organizations start there. But actually, there's much more to talk about, right? RPA is not always right. You know that, I know that. It's great for many, many scenarios, but there are some scenarios, for example, where the functionality you need to automate or drive integration around needs to be kind of near real time. We've got very high volume work requirement. And maybe you need to put some kind of customer-facing API on the front that's going to be called by other automated systems. Well, RPA just isn't going to perform fast enough for you in that scenario. And that's where the light blue box, more traditional application integration, API management technologies will come in. If you need to have long-running processes with lots of exception handling, the ability to escalate, hand off work, think about workforce scalability and so on, then that leads you down the path of complementing RPA with the blue box, the dark blue box, workflow, business process automation. And when you want to make any of this smarter, you need to bring AI into the picture. What's really key here is for any of you, watching, is to realize that, yes, there are vendors who can do all of this, but it's very important to see the value of openness. see the value of kind of avoiding one proprietary stack where there are no interfaces to anything else. And I want to illustrate that with one simple point, which is to highlight the kind of variety of roles that AI technology can play in this picture. So here's 5, and actually there are more, but here's 5 of the most common ones. We see AI being used to help organizations do process discovery and mining, so they can understand where to focus their automation efforts, yeah, and how to improve fastest. So that's one application of AI. Another one is in the context of long-running work, long-running processes where you have people, and maybe you have a hybrid workforce with RPA bots as well. And you need to understand for each individual case that's flowing through the process, how likely am I to hit my SLA? AI is also being used to help you predict case performance. Intelligent document processing, when you're working through customer correspondence or contracts or invoices or purchase orders or legal documents, being able to automatically classify correspondence, for example, translate documents to understand sentiment, AI plays a role there. When you have human workers at the core of work, but you want to make them smarter, to help them get trained up on the work faster, or to help them make sense of maybe a very sprawling product list and maybe a very complicated set of offers they have in a contact center. Being able to use AI to drive contextual predictions and recommendations is a great way to level up the performance of teams. And lastly, of course, chatbots, voice bots, using conversational AI to drive automated customer interaction. AI can play multiple roles, and the chances of you being able to use one provider across all of this space are pretty slim. So this is just one reason why having an open mindset around the platform that you build in your organization is super important. All right. Our time is moving on quickly, so I want to move to the final section of the presentation. First thing I want to do before I do that, though, is just take one more moment to talk about how this platform is evolving. One of the things we're seeing very strongly in this space is a shift to, let's say, citizen involvement, a shift away from everything being done by one core team and a shift towards work being done by, or some of the work of automation being done by subject matter experts, business analysts, and so on, out in individual teams in business departments. We're seeing these kind of hybrid models where core trained personnel, technical personnel are working hand in hand collaboratively with business focused teams. And this is super, super important for many reasons. One is there just aren't enough developers. That's a simple one. Number two is that automation is fundamentally about change, and successful automation is 100% dependent on business change management. And business change management success only really comes if you involve those people whose jobs are going to be changed in the work itself, in the change. Yeah, so change can't be done to people if you want it to be successful. You have to bring people into the work of change. And low code environments that we're finding now in RPA, in workflow, even in application integration and in AI are a fantastic foundation for bringing business teams into the change. And that ultimately drives more successful management of change and more successful delivery of ultimate outcomes. That's a clear feature of today, the next 12 months, the next 24 months. And any organization that's serious about shifting to a strategic view of automation has to have a plan in place for how you're going to take advantage of these shifts. All right, so where are organizations in terms of automation adoption? I haven't got time to go through all of this maturity model. What I'll say, though, is that we're finding organizations, typically, if they've got significant heritage in this, are somewhere between repeatable and managed. So most organizations that have been on the journey for more than 1 year or 2 years have moved beyond initial implementation. They've started to create full programs. They've started to understand what a portfolio of automation opportunities looks like, started to build skills. They've built a COE, maybe even more than one COE. They've started to understand what metrics look like and how to understand business cases. Now, where we find many organizations really struggling is the piece I just talked about, which is once you start to tackle the low-hanging fruit, if you like, the easy opportunities that are easiest to understand and easiest to get sponsorship for, once you move beyond those, you need to start thinking, where do we go next? How do we truly scale the value and make this truly strategic? And that's when we need to start really bringing more business people into the heart of change. And that's typically where we find organizations a bit stuck. And that's partly because you need new skills to make that shift. Organizations typically start out in a very kind of a top-down or a kind of very much command and control type view. We see there's an opportunity for automation. We start to kind of experiment centrally. We build skills centrally. We start to do multiple projects. We manage knowledge centrally. And then that works fine if everything you want to do is about understanding everything from a process-centric point of view. But if you really want to engage people and get them involved in the work of transformation, the work of automation, the work of change, you have to let them take over at least part of the agenda. And so you need different kinds of skills to make that shift, different kinds of cultural approaches. And so what we're finding is that one of the key things that needs to happen is COE needs to essentially change and extend its mandate and its approach. Now, again, I don't have time to go through every item on this picture, but I just want to call out that when we look at organizations and how they run centers of excellence, COEs, we typically find them starting out with very much a kind of command and control mindset. So here's in the center the typical kinds of functions we find a COE has. At the center, it's a repository for knowledge. And the dark blue pieces are where organizations normally start out. They manage the licensing of technology from vendors, and they manage the relationships with vendors, so the procurement essentially. They often host the automation platforms. They make sure that everybody uses the platforms in the right way. And they very often provide central development and design and architecture and testing resources. But what we find is that those kind of models are great, but they tend to, as I said, hit a bit of a wall. And fundamentally, what that kind of initial view is all about is about creating more. It creates more power at the center if you're not careful. So we tend to find that more and more power concentrates in the COE, in the center. And that's great for a while, but ultimately it can become a constraint to your scaling, become a constraint to your further success. Where we see truly successful COEs driving value is when they start to also look at the green pieces. And the green pieces, promotion and communications, which is really about finding success stories and telling those stories, or having teams who've succeeded tell their own stories. It's like a marketing function internally. When we see COEs hosting kind of peer support, where individual teams can help each other out. They can get help from the center, but they can also answer each other's questions and build each other up, help each other out. Where we find true business change management being enabled and empowered by the COE. These functions are more about, they're not about holding power at the center. They're about facilitating and enabling power to be truly distributed, but coordinated. So again, it's about a shift in mindset. And the most successful organizations that make that shift from tactical to strategic automation realize that the COE has to evolve, and it has to become less about a control authority and more about an enabler of communities, fundamentally, an enabler of distributed success. I've talked a lot of points over the last 25 minutes or so. I hope this has been valuable, and I'm very happy to take questions later offline. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can see my Twitter handle here, and I'd be delighted to talk more. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Neil. It was very interesting and very comprehensive analysis. And I wanted to tell you that I'm following you on YouTube, and I like very much your educational videos. I'm looking forward to the next one.